The saddest day, when the last ounce of hope for many families and friends evaporates and the disappeared become the deceased. Here in Manchester tonight, there has been more grief at the names of those known to have died, and there have been fast-moving developments in the police investigation as we learn more about the suicide bomber Salman Abedi.
He looked into the eyes of the Imam and gave him a really deadly look. He didn't say anything, but his facial features can tell the whole story.
We speak to the Libyan militiamen who interrogated the bomber's brother, Hashem.
His brother, before the attack, he called him and he called him, can you give me my mom to call her? So his brother says that something is going on there in Manchester, and he thought his brother, he will do something like bombing or attack.
As the first pictures of the suicide device are leaked to the American press, we hear from the Mayor of Greater Manchester.
I made known my concerns about it to the US ambassador. It's not acceptable to me that here there is a live investigation taking place. We cannot have information being put in the public domain that's not in the direct control of the British police and security services.
And we'll also talk to the head of intensive care at Royal Manchester Children's Hospital. Good evening from St Anne's Square, in the heart of Manchester, a city that has been so big-hearted in the last 48 hours. Well, I'm next to the flowers left as a crowd-built shrine to the victims of Monday's attack. This is the start of what might be a lonely journey for many families. The search for loved ones is over, or for many of the loved ones is over. The crowd of willing helpers can do no more, and the grieving begins over those whose lives are now known to have been taken on Monday night. Through the day, names have been added to the list of lives lost, a total now of 14 named. Meanwhile, there is a very active police investigation. 6 arrests have been made in the UK today, plus 2 in Libya. But interestingly, we are getting quite a bit of information about what is being discovered from American sources. And tonight, the New York Times has in fact published police images of remnants of Salman Abedi's bomb. I'm joined here by our defence editor, Mark Urban. Mark, let's just talk through what those photos show. I just took a very brief glance at them, but they're very clearly police images.
Yes, they're leaked scenes of crime officer type images published by the New York Times. We think shared through the FBI. That could be the route. The first one shows the remnants of a Carrymore backpack. There seems to be a belief now among investigators that this was not a suicide vest type of thing, but that it went off, and the way the attacker's body broke up, shall we say, is basis for the theory that it was on his back when it went off. The second image shows a silver cylinder, which is in fact a triggering device, a push-button triggering device that could be used to initiate the charge that then sets off the explosive. The third image is an image of some frankly unpleasant-looking ironmongery on the floor of the foyer there, and of course we all know what that did to the young people around the bomber. Once again, the feeling from investigators we understand from this leaked reporting is that the distribution of that shrapnel suggested know-how in the making of the bomb. And then the last image is a 12-volt battery. We have seen some of these used before as initiators. Effectively, what you do is you put a charge through a wire or some other thing which causes explosive to go off, particularly the homemade types of explosive. All of this, I think, compounds the picture of a bomb that was skillfully put together by someone who knew what they were doing, and of course the power of the explosion by somebody who knew how to do that, because get it slightly wrong and it either goes off before you reach the place, or it goes off with no effect, as it happened on 21/7/2005.
Right, now the other issue here, and we know it is causing irritation in the UK, is that they are sharing their intelligence because it's useful to do that, and then it's just finding its way into the New York Times.
Yeah, there's a double irritation, I have to tell you. Among the sort of network of people I know in counter-terrorism, they don't feel very much is being shared in this country. The tendency for Whitehall control freakery that we see in informing people on so many issues seems to be here. Now, you can say there are very good operational security reasons for that, but after all, some of the people I talk to are within the ring of secrecy here. And of course, this is compounded by the fact that they can see all of these things coming out through the media in the United States. You know, initially the reporting about how many people had died, that it was believed to be a suicide attacker, then the name. Now these images, which clearly do come from a scene of crime type investigator. So there is upset. Depressing was a word that one person I used spoke today, and clearly they'd like to see it stopped.
Thanks, Mark, and we're going to hear your report later on. Well, with so much interest in the investigation here and around the world, and deep sadness as well as the names and stories of the people killed emerge, only a degree of normality has been reached in Manchester. For most of the city, it's Wednesday and life goes on. No one, though, is in danger of forgetting what has happened here. And as a reminder, a heavy police presence and an active police investigation. A city centre block of flats raided at lunchtime as police searched for a network of conspirators who had worked with Salman Abedi. By 2 p.m. at this site, normal Manchester and police Manchester are side by side as a crowd has gathered to see what's going on. Well, you might have thought an armed police raid in the centre of the city would lead to some jitters, some nervousness or fear, but there's not a bit of that here. In fact, what several people have said to me is that they find the presence of the police, even armed police, quite reassuring.
Yeah, it feels under control, and it's quite easy to get back into the routine now just because you feel a bit safe.
Have you noticed any difference in people's behaviour, that people maybe don't push in queues as much? Is there a kind of, for a few days, the sort of everybody's very gentle and very nice to each other?
Yeah, well, it's, I don't know, it's little things, like you make more eye contact with people you walk about in the street because you all know you're going through the same sort of thing. You know, you're dealing with this in the place that you call home. Sort of thing, but.
What about the mood in Manchester, if there can be such a thing for a whole city? I mean, is it anger? Is it sadness? Is it back to normal?
It's certainly not back to normal. A sadness, but there's been overwhelming coming together of people, which has been amazing to see.
I think when the threat level was increased, it was a bit frightening because when they were saying there could be another attack, obviously that is going to scare people. But I think if you don't go out of the house, or if you don't just go about with your normal behaviour, then really letting them win, aren't you?
Everybody around here is trying to get on with things, but also to be involved. An initiative of local tattoo artists on Sunday will see money raised for victims.
Originates from the industrialisation of the city, the worker bee, the people that helped build the city, and it's come to symbolise, I think particularly now, how resilient and strong and hard-working the city is. All tattoos are going to be £50. We're going to try and tattoo as many people as possible. We've got 9 artists, and I think we've had somewhere in the region of like 1,700 people say they're coming to the event on Facebook, so I don't quite know how we're going to manage it, but we're going to do our best.
Getting back to normal is not just the next inevitable cliche in the narrative we impose on a city traumatised by an atrocity. It is an important reaction in itself. It implies there's no uprising, no thirst for revenge. The pitchforks aren't coming out. There's little relish for conflict, no excitement at the shared mission of self-protection. No, it is just weary resignation. Even arguing about Islam is something of a minority activity. The real concern is with the news of the names now being put to the number of those who were killed on Monday.
My name is Martin Hett, I'm 27 and I've been a Coronation Street superfan my entire life, but mainly I've been a Deirdre Barlow superfan.
Real lives, like that of Martin Hett, a vivacious 29-year-old who'd been about to take an extended trip to the US. He had been on TV talking about his Deirdre Barlow tattoo. Martin's last tweet was during the Ariana Grande concert. Or real lives like that of 8-year-old Safi Roussos. It's easy to see why the emotions still run high. Lucy Powell was MP for Manchester Central and is standing again.
I don't think I've given so many hugs to people as I have done over the last few days.
But people are just now going back to work, or most people are just getting on with life because that's what you do.
I think people are determined to do that. I think it's hard, very hard to do that, especially the closer you are to it, those that were at work that evening in the arena or at the station or any of the services, or people who know of family and friends, of which loads of people in Manchester know of people who were there that night. So I think the closer you are to it, the harder it is to dig deep, to carry on as usual, or to do the positive thing and not to be angry. But I think my sense is that most people are determined to do that in some way.
Love triumphs hate. Words we've heard a lot of in the last 2 days. But the irony is, we'll know we're really back to normal when we can start being horrible to each other again. We're not there yet. The raw grief, the sensitivity in the wake of tragedy mean that for the time being, nice is normal. I'm not the only one to note that it's sad that it takes such a ghastly event to show how nice we can be. Well, all the shrine was into Albert Square has been moved here to St Anne's Square. There's a sporting initiative going on there. The press have all been moved here too. And this is the heart of Manchester's reaction to Monday's event. Earlier this evening, I spoke to Andy Burnham, the newly installed Mayor of Greater Manchester. I spoke to him about the city and the police investigation, and I asked him if he was satisfied with the progress being made.
The collective effort of the public services of Greater Manchester has been incredible, but particularly with regard to the investigation, huge progress has been made over the last 24 hours, and I'm confident that those responsible will be hunted down and held to account.
One of the things on which you've commented in the past, in your previous role as opposition Shadow Home Secretary, is the PREVENT programme, and whether that is fit for purpose to prevent the kind of thing we saw on Monday.
I don't back away from what I said. It's like with Northern Ireland in the 1970s and 80s. Some of the policies can lead to a whole cloud of suspicion hanging over a whole community, or that's how that community can feel. And PREVENT has begun to be seen in that way by some in the Muslim community. And I've argued that it is in need of a review. You cannot have policies targeted just at one community without creating a sense of division and alienation. More broadly, I'd say we've really got to maybe learn the lessons of what's come through the people of Greater Manchester this week. It's all about solidarity and togetherness. The terrorists want to divide us. They want to set one group of people against another. You know, the message that's coming out of here is that we won't let that happen in this city. This individual who committed this unspeakable act of evil was a terrorist and an extremist. He does not represent the Muslim community of Greater Manchester in any way, shape or form.
It is, of course, worrying, though, that it's not just one man. It is what police are calling a network, potentially living in this community, operating and feeling so much hate towards everybody else.
And that's difficult. It's difficult for people to hear that the individual who committed this crime grew up in the city. His parents were welcomed here. That's difficult, obviously, for people to hear, but it doesn't change Manchester, in my view, in any way. People will still be the same. They will still be as openly generous and as welcoming as they've always been. And that's the way it will always be. You know, extremism has been on the rise around the world in the last 20 years.
At the national level, Theresa May obviously is the Prime Minister, and she's also in the midst of a general election campaign. I wonder whether you think that this could allow what Salman Abedi did on Monday could have an effect on the outcome of our general election.
I think it probably will change the character of the election campaign, but you know, that for me is a secondary concern. You know, the issue for me is responding in the right way to the enormity of what has happened here. Let's just remember what has happened: an unspeakable act of evil committed against children and young people in the heart of our city. It is absolutely right in those circumstances that party politics is pushed aside.
The way we're all getting information about the police investigation here, which, if you want it, it's better to go to the American newspapers than it is to the UK, because American sources are telling their newspapers more than our sources are telling us. They must be getting it from us. New York Times tonight has pictures of the detonator, the bomb, and all much more detail than the British authorities have given. What is your view of what is going wrong there?
It troubles me. On Monday evening, when the reports were first coming through to me, I agreed with the Chief Constable and others we would take a cautious approach to putting public information out, because we wouldn't want to get anything wrong or compromise the police investigation. And yet the first reports were coming, it seemingly, out of the United States. So that is concerning, because obviously you want international cooperation when it comes to sharing of information, because events like this can have that broader dimension. But it worries me greatly, and in fact I made known my concerns about it to the US ambassador. It's not acceptable to me that here there is a live investigation taking place. We cannot have information being put in the public domain that's not in the direct control of the British police and security services.
I mean, is it one obvious thing to do is just not to give it to them, or give it to them a few days later or something, but they seem to be on a hotline to the authorities here.
To have information put in the public domain before it was put there by people here is just wrong. The British police and security services need to be in the lead when this is a live investigation here. Now, I don't think anything has compromised some of what they would have done, but still, the principle is an important one. We are in the lead here, and that was the point I made to the US ambassador yesterday.
Andy Burnham, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, with me here in St Anne's Square is Dr. Peter Mark Fortune, head of the intensive care unit at Manchester Children's Hospital. In fact, you were the head, but in fact you're now the associate
head of the hospital, so I'm an intensive care consultant.
But you're an intensive care consultant. Andy Burnham there, talking to me earlier, just said that he thought the public services had operated well, as you would like them to operate on this kind of awful occasion. Is that your view of how it has worked at your hospital?
Well, my experience has been within the hospital, and if they work as well as they have worked, I mean, it's been extraordinary actually. People have worked efficiently, quietly, compassionately. I mean, they've been an extraordinary group of people to work with.
How did things work out on the night? Because presumably it was an ordinary night until 11 p.m.
It was an ordinary night, but what we have is a major incident plan for anything like this occurring, and really that just swung into action as soon as the first information came through.
So you were at home, presumably? Or?
I was at home. I didn't actually come until several hours after the incident started, so colleagues started the work off, but part of the plan was ensuring there was a rotation of staff to continue looking after.
It's no good just having the first 6 hours
covered.
Absolutely not. Right. Have you ever had a night like that in that ICU?
This has been a fairly extraordinary experience, I think, for anybody. Not one that anyone would want to repeat again. Although one, which I have to say, I do feel very proud of my colleagues, because throughout the whole time, people have worked incredibly efficiently and carefully together.
They are used to working with sick children. They work in an ICU unit in a children's hospital. Does this feel different, presumably?
So poorly and injured children normally come to us in ones, maybe twos if it's a car accident, and when you see numbers coming in from an incident like this, and also the background horror of an incident like this, changes it somewhat for you. Also getting people coming through to be looked after who you don't know their names really changes the environment you're working in.
Have you had a chance to speak to them, the children, very much? Presumably not all of them are yet able to
unfortunately, within intensive care, the children are largely asleep with us, and I've not had the opportunity to see anyone post waking up yet. No.
How have staff coped, do they?
They've coped by getting on with the job, by focusing what is actually needed. They've focused on the children firstly with the medicine, they've focused on the families and supporting and talking to them and keeping them informed, and they've also looked after one another, and I think there's going to be a lot of that going on over the next days as well.
Have you had a chance to come down here and see the way the community is?
No, but we felt the community in the hospital. It's been quite extraordinary. The well-wishers that have come in, the amount of food that's been donated into the staff who've just been working continuously has been extraordinary, and you felt all of that around you all times.
Peter, thanks very much, and very good luck with the rest of it.
Pleasure.
Well, we are still on a terror threat level of critical. That's the highest there is. How long will that level remain? Mark Urban cannot answer that question, but he has been looking at the kinds of factors that lie behind the decision.
In this moment, soldiers are on the streets, from special forces bolstering police firearms teams in Manchester to the troops deployed by constabularies around the country to protect key places. The security operation has become militarised, following a decision to raise the threat level to critical.
I think the going up to critical is quite a big step, so one would imagine it is probably to do with something more towards the idea of a network. But I also think if they don't know exactly who this person is and who he's connected to, it could be prudent to go to critical for several days until they're more confident that this is the individual on their own who happened to be given some rudimentary training but is not part of a network. Either way, it's prudent to go to critical for a short while.
As protective measures are put in place, the clearest confirmation yet that the police and MI5 are trying to roll up the Manchester bombers' associates.
I think it's very clear that this is a network that we are investigating, and as I've said, it continues at a pace. There's extensive investigations going on and activity taking place across Greater Manchester as we speak.
To that end, there were 4 raids in Manchester today and 1 in Wigan. And as the wider world follows up leads based on shared intelligence, France's Interior Minister suggested Abedi had been in Syria as well as Libya.
Someone of British nationality, of Libyan origin, who suddenly, after a trip to Libya, then probably to Syria, became radicalised and decided to carry out this attack.
Inevitably, with news like that coming out, there'll be more questions about why MI5 didn't assign a higher priority to Abedi, but also why Britain's intelligence partners are proving so leaky.
I never like that any information is leaked, and I think the fact that U.S. media were the ones to release the name first was not good. I think in the intel community, there's a lot of cooperation between foreign partners, between Britain, the United States, the Five Eyes. And the reason that works is because we all are working on the same sheet of music. We're all working with the same rules. And when somebody leaks information, that's going to hurt the cooperation.
And beyond the immediate drive to roll up Abedi's network, there are questions too about this. Troops deployed near the symbols of British democracy, and how de-escalation will be managed.
What we've seen is the triggering of plans made over the past 2 years by intelligence professionals. Is the government exploiting it for its own political purposes? Well, we'll only know that when we see how long the troops remain on the streets. Is it up to the general election? Is it beyond? That'll only become clear in the weeks to come.
I think they're acutely aware of the danger of that, and that's one of the reasons why the Prime Minister's predecessors moved the decision to move up and down this threat level out of the hands of ministers and put it in this independent JTAC organisation. I think they're going to be very careful not to be seen to be in any way trying to benefit from this for the election. And indeed, the problem is, will the election start to be affected by this if we see another attack?
In raising the threat level, follow-on raids and deploying troops, well-established protocols have been followed. But the question of getting things back to normal could be trickier, given how few people want the sight of troops on the streets to become commonplace in this country.
Mark Urban there. Well, Richard English wrote a book called Terrorism, How to Respond. He joins us now from Belfast. A very good evening to you. And I'm interested in what you think about the raising of the threat level, because does that bring attention to it? Does that send all the wrong signals, or are you thinking that the threat level of critical is a good response?
I think normally in these circumstances, these changes are made only if there's strong evidence to suggest that it's the best way of protecting the public, and I think it will be a short-term response to specific intelligence and specific information. Normally these things endure only for the period when it's judged to make life safer for people, and in that sense I don't really think it's alarmist. I think it's probably a pragmatic response to what seems to be a network threat at the moment in the immediate future.
Well, look, just tell us, give us the nutshell from your book. How should we respond to terrorism? What are the things that make for a good response, and one that perhaps doesn't encourage those who would do us harm to do so?
I think the two key things are first to be proportionate in response and not to overreact and make things worse, as has often been the case historically with terrorism. The second is to be realistic about what can be achieved. It's unrealistic to talk of getting rid of terrorism. It's unrealistic to talk of obliterating an ideology behind it. It is realistic to talk about ways of minimizing the threat. There are many things we live with in the UK, for example, which are more dangerous to life than terrorism, even this terrible week, and keeping it in proportion enables us to be patient. So, for example, I think intelligence-led policing over the long term is much more effective than militaristic foreign policy in dealing with terrorism. And some of the things that have come up in your programme tonight about maintaining a kind of resilient normality makes terrorism seem less effective as a tactic. If you make terrorism seem like it can transform things, you make it a more appealing method of trying to bring about political change than if you show what I think we should show, which is that it's ultimately going to be futile in terms of central political goals.
So that's why you have to try and keep it proportionate if you can. But it's very difficult, isn't it, not to be deeply affected by the brutal killing of 20 or more children, isn't it? And it's what do you think of the public response as opposed to the authorities' response?
I think it's entirely understandable that there's a revulsion, a shock, a horror, and you've seen that understandably in Manchester and I think internationally as well. Having said that, if you take a very long-term view of this, you have to balance what is emotionally understandable with what's going to make terrorism less likely in the future. And in a sense, what we need the society to think about is the long-term effects of demonstrating that society can endure, that we can learn to live with this terrible threat, which is occasionally lethal, but only occasionally lethal. I'm speaking to you from Belfast, a city that's endured this for many, many years. And I think that kind of commitment to normality is in the end going to make terrorism a less appealing mechanism of change for people. And in that sense, it's probably the best response. Though, as you say, it's difficult given the emotions after a horror like Monday.
Yeah. I'm interested in your view of media coverage of these things, Richard, because after the Westminster Bridge attack, Simon Jenkins came on Newsnight and said he thought we had to sort of calm down and not make as much of it because we were encouraging the phenomenon we were so hating. I mean, let's take an example: naming and following up, as we are about to do actually with Salman Abedi. Naming him and looking into his background, is that something that you would think we should try and avoid doing?
I think the two things there are, first, as long as there's no way of compromising police investigations, it's not particularly harmful to do what you're describing. But I think Mr. Jenkins is absolutely right that, in a way, if we do cover these things, we don't want to exaggerate the nature of the threat. Even this week, it's much more likely that people will die in road accidents in England than from terrorism. But also, I think that the key thing is that we need to make sure that as we do discuss it, we keep a sense of proportion, we keep a sense of balance, and for all of the horror, which has been catastrophic for the victims, we make sure that we don't exaggerate this and make it into a bigger threat than it is, because I think that would make it seem like a more attractive target. If people think they can change society, they can change politics through bombing, through killings, as we've seen in Westminster, as we've seen in Manchester, it's more likely that we'll have future terrorism. So while I understand the horror of what's happened this week, we also need to think about future victims and making them as few in number as possible. And in that sense, all discussion of it should keep this in proportion, should avoid overreaction, and should maintain a kind of calmness, both governmentally and I think societally as well.
Very fair. Richard, thank you very much indeed. Richard English. Well, we are here because one man blew himself up on Monday, Salman Abedi. It would be nice to expunge his name from history and not to hand him the legacy of notoriety, but there is always a need to find out about the motivations and the associates of those who seek to destroy us. We already know quite a bit about him, and we believe he was not working alone. We know he has family connections to Libya, and over there, 2 members of his family were arrested today. John Sweeney has been trying to piece together the story of Salman Abedi and has uncovered some extraordinary news about him.
Just before suicide bomber Salman Abedi struck at the Manchester Arena on Monday night, Newsnight can reveal his last act. He phoned his mother. The authorities in Tripoli told us,
his brother, before the attack, he called him and he called him, can you give me my mom to call her? So his brother felt that something is going on there in Manchester, and he thought his brother he will do something like bombing or attack. So after that, he told us, I having internet and I see the attack in Manchester, and I knew that my brother was.
The Libyan authorities said he'd been in the country very recently.
He came here into Tripoli in 18th of April this year, and he came back after, I think, 2 weeks or 3 weeks.
That means he returned from Libya earlier this month. The Libyans also told us that their security forces had been monitoring his younger brother.
We were looking for him maybe 1 month and a half, but he's a member of ISIS. We were not quite sure about it, but when we arrested him and we asked him, he told us, I have ideology with my brother. Hashim, he said, I knew everything about my brother, what he was doing there in Manchester.
Salman Abedi was born and bred in Manchester. This is his home in the south of the city. The question haunting Manchester today was how could he do what he did? This man has some answers. He's British Libyan, has known the family for 25 years and lives directly above the bomber's brother.
In recent conversation with people and recent meetings with other friends, they were saying the guy has there was something is disturbing him, if you know what I mean. Even though when I seen him in the past 3 months, he didn't look like he was anything on his mind. But I've been told he's been a loner, he's been a bit naughty on the street, bit, I can't say violent, but a bit aggressive on the street. Started fighting with people, finger signs, stuff like this.
Akram is not the only person who saw a change in the 22-year-old. The neighbours of Salman Abedi say that in the last couple of months at least he started behaving oddly. He would pick fights with people about where he parked his car, where he put his bins, and that is not the signature of a bomb maker. The reluctant conclusion is that Salman Abedi may have delivered the bomb, but he didn't make it. Today, police launched a series of raids across Greater Manchester, arresting 5. Tonight, a 6th suspect was arrested, a woman. They've announced that they're looking for a network of people who helped the bomber. In Libya, the authorities have arrested Salman Abedi's father and his younger brother. Here, police are questioning Salman Abedi's older brother, Ismail. This is his flat. So this is Salman Abedi's brother's flat. Police raided. We've been told they actually raided 2 flats. They got the wrong one first. Maybe true, maybe not. And now you can hear them. They're cutting doors. They're repairing the damage. The last time Britain was hit by bombs like this was on 7/7. The evidence is growing that the police and security services may have missed warnings about Salman Abedi. A community worker has told the BBC that the authorities were warned about his extremism several years ago. They reportedly said he was supporting terrorism, and he had expressed the view being a suicide bomber was okay. An incident at Salman Abedi's local mosque in Didsbury is revealing. Worshippers told Akram that after the imam had criticised Islamic State, Abedi reacted.
He approached the imam and gave him a really killer look. Really bad look in his eyes, like, watch what's going to happen, or, you know, it's a threatening look, let's put it this way.
But did the local Muslim community do their utmost to warn the authorities about Abedi?
Has shot us all.
Today, the Didsbury Mosque held a press conference, but they told us very little about the man who had been part of their community, or even that he'd worshipped there.
Did Salman Abedi pray here, sir? Sir, did Salman Abedi pray here? He did attend this mosque. So some questions for the security services and the police, but also some questions for the people who run this mosque. The first one of which is, did Salman Abedi pray here? And the answer to that is, we're not answering any questions. And some people might say, that's not good enough.
After the attack on Westminster Bridge this March, it became obvious that Khaled Massoud was a lone wolf. But the more one looks into the killer Salman Abedi, the stronger the suspicion grows that too many clues were overlooked, that not enough information was given, that the horrors of Monday night
could have been averted.
John Sweeney, well, there have been more arrests since John put that report together. There's been a seventh. It was 6, now it's 7. The latest news just come in on that is in Nuneaton. I was actually by chance talking to a Libyan living in Manchester earlier today. He was in his 20s, I think, and I asked if he'd been exposed to pressures of radicalisation. I have to say he could not have been more contemptuous of those like Abedi who fall for it. He thought it was much easier for speakers of Arabic like himself to understand how stupid those folks sound when they spout their views. Well, let's finish the programme by reflecting on some of these issues. With me now is Furkan Naim, who's a community organiser for Citizens UK in Manchester. It's a national group, it's not an Islamic group. It tries to help those from different communities engage fully with society. And also Helen Pidd, the Northern editor of The Guardian. Very good evening to you both. How's the Muslim community in Manchester reacted, and how are they feeling over this then?
Well, I think it's one, as every other citizen here in Manchester, I think it's one of sorrow, one of grievance, one of utter shock and condemnation for what has happened. But I think with the Muslim community, there's probably two feelings that they're going through. One is just like every other citizen of this shock and horror that's befallen our city. But the other one is there's this person who's done this in the name of our religion and tried to hijack it and using the name of Islam whilst doing it. So there's two different kind of emotions that they're going through as well.
I have been struck today just how little talk about Islam there is of any kind. It's just as though why go on about it?
I think there's something about the city of Manchester. There's a backbone here. There's a resilience that we're all together. We stand up for each other. When things go wrong, we help each other out. But also, it's not like in other northern towns and cities where you have segregated communities like Blackburn, Oldham.
It's less segregated here.
Absolutely. I think people are spread out and people get on with each other here. So I think maybe that's perhaps why there's not been as much talk about the Islamic issue, because people feel integrated.
Does that ring true with you?
Kind of, but you've got to remember that the centre of Manchester is very different from the outlying boroughs of Greater Manchester. You know, if you look at where the UKIP voters are, they're not in Manchester Central. You know, where the sort of glitzy skyscrapers are, they're elsewhere.
How much hate and chatter is there about we need to do something about Islam? Is there a lot of that? Is that
I have to say I haven't heard it yet.
No.
I think people are just reeling.
Yeah.
And we've not had a chance really to take stock of what's happened because
it's moved so quickly. It's 48 hours ago.
I know, and we've just had the 7th arrest, and obviously the net is widening. I think this latest arrest was in Warwickshire, in Nuneaton. You know, I never thought I'd be spending my afternoon outside a flat in the gay village that a SWAT team had, you know, blown the door open. You know, potentially looking for a bomb factory. It's all very surreal.
I think it's also important to note, whilst there's lots of speculation, and it is 40 hours and things have moved so fast, we still have to remember that there are families that are still got missing victims and grievances and stuff like that. So that's really important.
How many Muslim communities are there in Manchester? Because the one thing is there are quite a few Libyans here, aren't there? And do they mix? Do they know each other? Are they all separate? Or
I think it's quite a mixed community. Like I said, you don't have segregation, but even within the Muslim community, all the different communities are quite mixed. The mosque that the perpetrator allegedly went to, it's in Didsbury. It's in Didsbury, a place in South Manchester where they have to open up their doors because the community around them is very mixed and open. And I think generally the Muslim community is quite integrated and feels part of the makeup of Manchester, and that's the togetherness, and that's what we've seen over the past 2 days really, and we see here and we've seen the diverse communities.
Helen, we do know that there have been 7 arrests, and we know that the police are looking for and working on the assumption that there is a network, and it was an interesting word, wasn't it? A network as opposed to a
network isn't just a little gang, is it?
No, it's a little bit more sinister somehow.
Yeah, and organised. And from the people that we've spoken to who actually knew the guy who blew himself up, they say he wasn't a particularly smart guy. No. And wouldn't have had the know-how to do this all by himself. So, as the pieces of the jigsaw are being filled in, it's adding to the sense of unease and disquiet about what might happen next.
And I think on that, what we saw was a calculated attack that had happened, and I think there is a network probably out there as it is, because he's not acted alone. There are other people out there, and I think now is the time for the Muslim community to really stand up and work together and build trust with the authorities. We've got to understand that the authorities are here to look after us. And
we had Shaista Gohir on the programme yesterday from the Muslim Women's Network, who had in a way quite harsh words for elements of the community who would not think of themselves as jihadists, but she thought were quietly complicit in always criticising anything the government did to try and shut down the more disruptive elements.
I think it's always a two-way thing. I think, you know, the government has to take stock, but also I think amongst the Muslim community there has to be more trust of the government, of the authorities, of the security services. We have to work together, and I think the Muslim community now has to step up, and this is an opportunity to basically showcase what we're about, what they're about, what they can do.
Quick one, Helen, have you spent much time down here in your Guardian beat? It only sort of arrived from Albert Square, didn't it?
And it's, I have to say, you know, as a journalist, you try to remain neutral and calm. But I was glad I was wearing sunglasses today when I was reading some of the tributes, you know, from small children. And there is a bit of defiance there. There's one of them that says, you know, you can't scare us, we're Manx. You know, but I think a lot of us are actually a little bit scared and very, very sad at what's happened.
The true spirit of Manchester will shine through.
Thanks. Well, that's all for tonight. We're going to leave you with the pupils of Cheetham School of Music, which sits in the shadow of the Manchester Arena, who held their own vigil for the victims of the attack on their city. Good night.
Hello there, 26 degrees today.